Number 10, oral care. When it comes to overall healthcare, your teeth should also be in that list. And for the Victorians, typically they only really go to the dentist when the damage is near its breaking point. And because they didn't have any toothpaste that wasn't drenched in the multitude of poisons they thrived off on, people would brush their teeth using salt, typically putting salt on their fingers and then rubbing across their teeth. The toothbrush as we know today was invented in 1857, however, it wasn't until the nylon bristle toothbrushes of the 1930s came along that brushing one's teeth became more widespread. Salt is a natural disinfectant that helps with gum disease in a few ways. It removes loose debris and cleans the teeth and gums, but reduces inflammation and swelling and soothes the gums. It also gets rid of decay and plaque. Gum recessions can be caused by eating too much salt, and gums as part of the immune system may pull back to reveal a cementum of teeth, making them more vulnerable and less resistant to tooth decay. So while it may look effective, it's actually temporarily removing surface stains. As for salt, the same holds true. Salt acts as a surface abrasive and can definitely make the teeth look whiter, but it can definitely damage your tooth enamel. And unfortunately, once your teeth is damaged, it's damaged for life. And it wasn't until the 1940s that the concept of brushing one's teeth would be considered a routine event. Number 9, bad bathrooms. The bathroom as we know it is a Victorian invention, but at first it could be a dangerous place. Besides horrible cases of scalding in the bathtub, there was even reports that there were incidents of lavatories spontaneously exploding. The reason this might be was due to the fact that flammable gases such as methane and hydrogen sulfide emanating from human waste built up in the sewers, and then early toilets would leak back into the homes where they would theoretically be ignited by a naked flame of a candle. Wild stuff, but that did happen. And since showers were not invented yet, everyone did bathe to keep clean. Most people bathed in rather small quantities of water in their bedrooms with a basin and pitcher of cold water. Poorer families would have to boil water on the stove and then add it to the cold water to a wooden or metal tub, usually in the kitchen area where it was time for a deep scrub down. Hands, face, and armpits and crotch were essentially regions that was not necessarily to be submerged in order to maintain cleanliness. Nicer homes not only had proper porcelain bathtubs, both hot and cold taps nearby, even some had the luxury of a luxurious foot bath, but these extravagant things were more for your feet. Number 8, flammable parkinson. Although it's a great invention as it helped many advance many parts of our modern civilizations of immense proportions, it still aggressively fills out our landfills and destroys thousands of ecosystems. But still, it's a very useful material, but of course not everything about it at first was beneficial to its beholder. A British inventor named Alexander Parkes, who invented the moldable material and was considered the first celluloid of a bulk material for forming objects as we call today, plastic. He christened it as Parkinson, but it quickly became known as its American name of celluloid. The development of celluloid was particularly spurred by the desire to reduce reliance on ivory with its shortage caused by overhunting, and the inventor Alexander was never able to see his invention reach to full fruition after his firm went bankrupt due to scale up costs. Such early plastics were highly desirable because they allowed everything from brooches to hair combs to billiard balls, previously only available in expensive ivory, to be made cheaply. It was even used to make collars and cuffs that could be easily cleaned. Unfortunately, Parkinson is also very flammable as it degrades and can self-ignite and is explosive on impact. Weird. Number 7, boracic acid in milk. No one should cry over spilt milk unless it's been treated by boracic acid, and in that case you should be 100% allowed to cry and your experiences are valid. In the 1800s, boracic acid was believed to purify milk, removing the sour taste and smell from milk that had gone off. In a casual remark in her widely popular 1861 book, Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management mentioned one should use boracic acid in their milk. She told consumers that this was quite harmless in an addition, but she was wrong. Boracic acid purifying milk was responsible for getting a lot of people sick. Small amounts of boracic acid could cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea, but worse, it was what boracic acid concealed that was particularly dangerous, and before pasteurization, milk was often contained a huge amount of bovine TB, or, beef TB, tuberculosis, which would flourish in the bacteria-friendly environment created by the substance. Bovine TB damages the internal organs and the bones of the spine, leading to severe spinal deformities. It is estimated that up to 500,000 young people had died from bovine TB from the milk in the Victorian period, which is why you should check your sources and not get everything from one source, like your mom telling you this random article that she found on Facebook. Number 6, carbolic acid poisoning. Victorians linked cleanliness to godliness and respectability. The idea that it was next to godliness was very deeply ingrained. The new science of microbes only testified the Victorian preoccupation with tackling germs which they now knew could lurk out of sight. Chemical cleaning products to eradicate dirt and diseases were heavily advertised and highly effective, but their active toxic ingredients like carbolic acid were contained in bottles and packages that were indistinguishable from other household products. Boxes of caustic soda and baking powder could be easily mistaken. In September 1888, it was reported in an article that 13 people had been poisoned by carbolic acid in one incident, and 5 died. And only in 1902 did the Pharmacy Act made it illegal for bottles of dangerous chemicals to to be similar in the shape of ordinary liquids. So it took a couple of years, but still, at least now we wouldn't have issues identifying bottles from the other. But as cleaning products go, arsenic and strychnine were commonly used in Victorian cleaning products, which if some don't know, the immediate symptoms of acute arsenic poisoning includes vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Those are followed by numbness, tingling of the extremities, and muscle cramping and death. But the Victorian era was also about fitting into their corsets, and a few illnesses wasn't necessarily seen as a bad thing. But either way, the era in itself wasn't unfamiliar with tragedies, as death lurked at every corner from either poisonings or TB.
Number 5, the bedroom trial. So divorce, again, wasn't a thing. On the upside of dying early, it potentially meant that you weren't locked in a marriage for too long. If the marriage did end, it wasn't a divorce, it was an annulment, which was very expensive. A common reason this happened was due to consanguinity, which was close relations by blood or marriage, which was forbidden. Other grounds would be adultery, leprosy, and impotency. Also failure to concede to the marriage debt, which was the obligation for both spouses to engage sexually. It actually didn't matter where this happened, you had to do it even if it was in a church. It was a big deal. Enter the bedroom trial. Court cases from the 14th century show records that bedroom trials took place that would determine whether a marriage should continue. The bedroom part is exactly as it sounds. The man and the woman were placed in a bed together and were to be watched by the wise women for several nights. If over the course of the night the man's member remains of no use, i.e. impotence, then it was determined that the marriage should end. But the wise women were most likely either complete strangers or the groom's grandmother. So I doubt that would have helped with the getting it up part. Poor guys.
At number 4, marrying the country. If you married an entire country, does that count as polygamy? Are you technically married to everyone in the country, or just the one country as a singular unit? These are the shower thoughts that I wish I could ask medieval queens, but unfortunately they died a long time ago, along with their marriage secrets and probably some recipes for poison too. Back to this whole marrying the country idea though. Back in the medieval age, when someone became queen, they had to get married more than once. For them, it wasn't just about marrying their spouse, they also had to marry their country. This process was called consecration, and it was something that a ruler had to go through in order to be a legitimate queen. The queen would go through a symbolic marriage to the realm, complete with prayers and a blessing and a ring and a crown. It was essentially like a real wedding, except the groom was a nation of people. Sounds like a happy marriage to me. Yeah.
Number 3, the veil. As we have determined so far in our list, love wasn't the primary reason for marriage, especially for nobles, so as a result there were quite a significant amount of arranged marriages. Besides the symbolism of humility and purity, it was also used as a way of disguising the bride entirely. The bride would often be wrapped from head to toe to protect her from evil spirits. This tradition goes all the way back to ancient Roman times. That's one explanation, but during arranged marriages, it was more literally used to hide the face of the bride from the groom. So if he didn't like what he saw after he literally unwrapped the package, well, too bad, she's yours now. Eventually veils progressed to being much smaller, but the tradition of revealing the bride to the husband to declare ownership remained a tradition even to this day, kind of, except now it's more romantically idealized. Did you see Priyanka Chopra's awesome veil in that? You know the one.
At number 2, long distance marriage. You know how during the pandemic people started having Zoom weddings? Well, in a way, people have been doing something similar since the medieval ages. Back then, a lot of weddings were simply for political reasons, and so a big ceremony was rarely needed. So when two people from different kingdoms were getting married, they didn't necessarily need to be there for the wedding. Instead, they could send proxies and have someone marry their new spouse on their behalf. This would be the legal binding of marriage, you know, the paperwork side of things. But once both parties could finally meet in person, then they would hold a second ceremony with all the pomp and circumstance that you would expect. And yes, it still included the whole watching the consummation thing. Ew. This proxy marriage actually happened to Marie Antoinette, and her brother was her proxy until she could get to the formal ceremony. So now we know that even back then, you didn't have to show up on time to your own wedding, and you could just get someone else to do it. Sounds a little cold to me, but like I've said before, love is dead and it died a long time ago. Mic drop, thank you.
Number 1, last but not least, and this is the most messed up, the Lord's Right. This one is definitely the most messed up tradition, and I don't even know how it was justified in the first place. Like, why was it even in place? Someone clearly made this happen so they could piss people off. The last thing anyone wants at their wedding is someone interfering with the wedding night. As we know, people for the most part had to observe the ceremony, but the Lord's Right was something even more horrific. The droit de seigneur was a feudal right that existed in medieval Europe that gave the lord of the land the right to sleep with the bride on the first night of the marriage. That's right, so most often they would take the bride's virginity. Now, just how often this right was carried through is debated, but if your lord had a particular vendetta against you, it wouldn't be surprising. This right could also extend to a lord taking the virginity of every woman in the village, even if they didn't want to get married. It was ridiculous. However, late Middle Age and Renaissance era texts don't clearly determine whether this practice ever occurred. Texts from 15th century Switzerland references the Lord of Mar demanding the right of the first night or a hefty fee. So either you pay for it or I do it. The droit de seigneur was depicted in Mel Gibson's Braveheart, which added to the infamy of the idea, but no physical evidence determines whether any lord actually did it, but it did technically exist. Gross.
Number 10. No calling, no gifts. This is a time in history when men were told to be gentlemen and women told to be ladies. Naturally, that came with some weird social practices. For instance, women were discouraged from accepting gifts from men. Personally, I like to give my girlfriend flowers and chocolate. I'm a classic guy, what can I say? Can't go wrong with that. However, even if a handsome silver-tongued devil such as myself were to give some flowers and the finest dark chocolate a 7-Eleven has to offer, and a most promising woman were to accept said gifts, she may not be able to call me back. Literally because, well, the phone isn't exactly a thing yet, and also because that's something else women were just discouraged from doing. Call on a man? No way, Jose, even if he is super nice and waiting for a genuine response. One etiquette guidebook from 1882 called any woman who calls on a man ill-bred and positively improper to do so. I like when people give me flowers and chocolate. Maybe call me sometimes, I'm a little lonely. Number 9. Act like a lady. How dare ladies do anything unladylike? Ugh, said every man ever in the Victorian era. This is a time in history when ladies gotta be ladylike. That means makeup, corsets, and don't you dare do anything masculine. Oh, that's me angry. This is still a time when food isn't the greatest either, so imagine if you got an upset tummy at the dinner table. Happens to me a lot. You've got a handsome prince that your parents have arranged for you to marry. When you go to greet him, you do it with a simple gesture, as kneeling to curtsy could turn your linens a certain shade of embarrassment that 1800 stain cleaning technology could never wash away. You'd poop yourself. Where's Billy Mays when you need him, right? How dare a woman do such things as go number 2, or even worse, break wind? Oh, the nerve! That's just the way it went, folks. I don't make the rules. Number 8. Charged with love. Naturally, this was the past, and not being open to homosexuality was just the way it was. Especially when tucking yourself into bed at night alone wasn't allowed either. Homosexuality just wasn't gonna happen. They just weren't gonna be approved of it. It's just how it goes. It sucks. However, it's almost as if there's been love on this earth since day one, and to stop that kind of love, it's just silly, man. Wherever I go, everyone is welcome on this channel. Or my Twitch. Chetty loves everyone, because in reality, this is a time period where you could wind up in jail for that kind of love. And as Austin Powers would say, that's just not very groovy, baby, yeah. Strangely enough, homosexual relationships between women might have been completely overlooked, as they were sometimes mistaken for women being friends. Yeah, I know. Some women even lived together, but given that they probably needed each other for financial support, people just kind of thought that's how it went, and they ignored it. It's like they live together, and you start putting the pieces together, and it's like, you know, I don't know, something weird going on there. But love everybody, come on, be nice. Number 7, a good thing. If I'm talking about medieval times, there's a good chance I'm gonna bring up the super not cool, not fun, do not condone or support the behavior of marrying a woman at the age of 12. Yucky. In part 1, I mentioned that there was a ton of corners and streets being worked by the only other job besides street cleaners at 3 a.m. by women. However, after venereal disease was becoming a serious issue, it was getting pretty bad. It was becoming clear that a lot of people who were getting sick were young women, like 11 to 16 age group. Ooh. Which I shouldn't have to tell you is bad. That's pretty bad, dude. When I was 16, I was rocking Black Ops 2, hanging out with my buddies, and partying hard in the summer. I got a lot of good stories, maybe I'll share them one day. Catching all that nasty stuff is no way to spend your youth, so thank God the government changed the age of consent to 16 years old, which I know is not a solution for everything that was going on, but it was a small step forward in the right direction. That's what we like, good history, moving forward. We like that, Chetty likes. Number 6, the seamstress. Being that the Industrial Revolution had started and business was booming, People needed to travel for business, or more specifically, men needed to travel for business, which means they gotta be away from their wives, and that means they are away from the very thing we're talking about today, bedroom stuff. How did men solve this issue? Well, there was no shortage of ladies roaming street corners to aid in that matter. However, there's an option with a little less syphilis. There were aids or early blow-up dolls called travel ladies. Strangely enough, it was stored in a gentleman's hat. What? That's so wrong. Once it was ready to be used, it was inflated and reassembled. This is a quote from an ad from one of the products. It is inflated to the essential part of the woman wanted by a man. That just doesn't sound very good. This is why we have boards of people to check stuff from products before it gets shipped out to the public. I feel like that just wouldn't fly very well today. Number 5. Emo Girl. All the Forever Alone people, raise your hand. Let me hear you roar XD. I like to joke around a lot and say I'm a lawyer, a firefighter, and the cutest guy on the whole wide internet. But if there's one thing I know, it's people. I like people. I love them. I spend a lot of time with them, and after hearing this, I've come to the conclusion that this is where the emo girls come from. I figured it all out. It's down to a science. I'm a scientist now. Do you ever get that feeling in your tummy on Valentine's Day because you know it's going to be another one alone? And you'll be forced to be on your own, and that means sad music and crying in your room. Same, it's Drake's Marvin room for me. Well, single women in Victorian times had similar issues. Since women were expected to marry and have kids, single women who were also forever alone were pitied by society, which I argue is just way worse. No one wants to be pitied. Ugh. Number 4, gold diggers. She take my money when I'm in need. As she travel. Okay, anyway, back to the actual content. Well, not exactly. While today in a place like sunny California, you might see an older man with a woman who's half his age. Maybe he's driving a nice car, or she's got on the very best and latest from Louis Vuitton. Stylish, yeah. Most of us think some thoughts about what we might think is going on there. We can kind of be judgmental sometimes when we see things like that. However, looking through a lens of 2022 to Victorian times might make the women of Victorian times appear to be gold diggers, but in reality, it was because all of their financials were tied to their husbands, legally too. Which, if you can imagine, that system didn't work too well. What if your husband is broke? What if your husband is running amok with sultry lasses on the street corners? Like I said before, no divorce, but even if she could leave him easily, supporting herself afterwards was going to be an issue, especially financially. Number 3, birth factory. Just pump them out. The faster the better. Quantity over quality. Just get them out. The use of birth control, as you can tell, was not a common practice. Anyone who's over the age of 25, ask your grandparents how many brothers and sisters they have. I'm willing to bet it's in the 6 to 8 range. Let me know in the comments below, I'm curious. A trend that would continue for a few decades after. Education is important, and I'll get to that in my next part. Women were simply expected to act this way. Maybe it was the sign of the times since the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Maybe the factories needed workers, I don't know. Which, in case you didn't know, they used children as employees. Maybe not so nice. Unfortunately, that was when there was an issue, and there were many. They had no HR to go to, and that was the least of their worries, really. Number 2, no school for you. No higher education for women. Banned from going to university. I don't think so, not very nice, no. Honestly, any society that doesn't want half of their population to go to school probably has a few things to work out. It's a boys' club, and they can only go to university so that they can learn to be smarter and be businessmen, so they can earn money and thus have the facilities to court a woman who really doesn't have a choice anyway. Women had jobs, not careers. And they were all the jobs that you can think of. The ones that were too feminine for men, as women were too feeble to participate in a men's job, which is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm happy to say that in 2022, we showed them wrong. Chetty loves everyone. Just remember that, I love everybody. You go, girls. Number 1, strict rules. Okay, so after a night in the bed sheets with the gal that you love, or maybe the one that you found, there's a good chance that 9 months later, a smaller version of you two could be walking around. A byproduct of intimacy, if you will. This was always something I wanted to rant about, but I always found it strange how strict parents and teachers from this time were with their kids. You gotta brush your hair, bed made, and whatever you do, don't ask for more gruel. Please, sir, could I have some more? Whatever that Charles Dickens book was, I think it was Oliver Twist. They made us read those books as kids, and I don't know why, because they're kind of boring. From the extreme military code ethics happening at home to the long days in a factory at work, being a kid was tough, man. Earning the punk rock blues of today. I'm just a kid and my life is a nightmare. Number 10, it's just a cold sore. The Victorian era is cool. The art, the fashion, and technology of the time, I think, are always fun to take a look at, especially since steampunk has its roots in the Victorian era, and who doesn't like steampunk? Come on, there's just a lot of cool steampunk stuff, and honestly, we haven't seen a lot of that in a long time. We need more. We need more. Something not so cool from that era, however, was what you could catch from another person should you decide to take up a bed with another person. Syphilis, yep, one heck of a disease. Funny enough, it was so common that it was making intimacy itself an unusual practice. People were scared, and honestly, maybe rightfully so. There's no cure, and if it progresses to its later stages back then, well, you go crazy. And then you end up being that guy that's always screaming in the streets. Every city has one. You know what I'm talking about. Number 9, the French letter. The issues of intimacy and its repercussions were becoming quite clear in the Victorian era. Something had to be done, as spending any amount of time in the brothels could have you shucking barnacles off your lower deck in the morning, if you know what I mean. Introducing the revolutionary new invention, prophylactics. For those that are college age, you might find it disturbing that these party favors weren't made of rubber or disposable. Yeah, hear me out. They were made of sheep's guts, and they had to be soaked first so they would become flexible. Because when you put these bad boys on, they had to be fastened on. It's not very good, not very attractive. Once the deed had been signed off on, the device was then washed and then hung up to dry like your dirty laundry. Once it was dry, it was placed in a small box for the next time. Because seeing your wife's ankles might make you feel a certain kind of way, and now you just have it ready to go. And number 8, the products of our sins. Having fun when the lights can be turned off is great. Who doesn't enjoy a little toe curling? Yeah? Except sometimes there's this crazy thing that can happen, where after 9 months, another human spawns in. Insane, right? I know. Well, back in the Victorian era, this phenomenon was happening, but only for married couples. As you have to be married, of course, or else a child would be born out of wedlock, which to people at the time was just the worst. Oh, I never. These stigmas were not favorable for women, as some preferred to avoid that kind of press by abandoning or straight up just unaliving their children. Horrible, just horrible times. Just another one of those good old wholesome times in history where we were treating women with the utmost respect and decency. Very nice. We were actually not very nice. Number 7, diet. Bedroom misconduct was becoming a huge issue. Refer to number 9 and 10. While women did get most of the blame because, well, you know, history, men did get some of the blame. The issue of intimacy for men could be described as barbaric primal sense. So how do we curb this? How do we stop men from acting on these caveman urges, ooga booga? Well, simple really. Men just have to stop eating certain foods, as it was thought at the time that food had a link to the misconduct, or rather, the overabundance of bedroom-related issues, including mustard, pepper, rich gravy, beer, wine, cider, and tobacco. And if you weren't paying attention, that's basically the diet of every man in Victorian times. Not sure how a jar of finely prepped mustard would get you flustered, but okay, sure. The beer makes sense though, you know, have a few beers, and even the mop leaning over in the corner looks pretty lonely, and boy, that mop has lovely hair. Number 6, job market. Ladies of the evening, women of the night. Women who make beds go bump in the night. They were everywhere in Victorian London, a lot. It's partially related to some of the points I previously mentioned. Now, I'm not here to say it's necessarily a bad thing. Personally, I don't think it is. As they say, it's the oldest profession in the book, with an estimated 80,000 women working in the night by the late 1890s. You'd have to be crazy to miss that. I mean, they were literally everywhere. With numbers like that, there's something for everyone and in varying price ranges, as they can be found in brothels or townhomes set up by the wealthy men for their mistresses, pretty much anywhere trouble likes to spawn. Even some artists took advantage of this by living with the gorgeous girls of the evening, as going behind closed doors with one was debatable, but becoming friends? Now that's a social transgression. That, oh, becoming how dare you befriend the people of the night?
Number 5, smallpox snack. This is gonna be a little nasty for some, but before I get into it, when it comes to medication, especially in an era where protections against viruses, disease, or infections were scarce and uncommon, in ancient China they had written down guides on one of history's first vaccinations. Even before it was written down, people have heard usages of vaccines and figured they could do it themselves. So when parents heard of feeding scabs of smallpox patients to their young as a form of smallpox vaccine, they figured it might work the same way. Like chickenpox, they thought maybe exposing yourself to smallpox could keep you healthy and help boost your natural immune system to deflect the illness. But of course, this made the situation more worse for them, as this form of treatment wasn't any better. Instead, doctors would actually crush the scabs into a powder and then blow them up people's noses. I mean, it did work for a bit, but it was 2% chance getting smallpox scabs inhaled into your nostrils would infect and affect you mortally. However, it was a better chance statistically in defending yourself against the smallpox spread head on. So naturally, people all over would sign up for this effective cure. Of course, we don't do that now, but hey, c'est la vie, whatever it takes. Number 4, I could hair less. When you're living in Imperial China, you could pretty much bet off the chance you might be getting micromanaged. So much to the point it might irritate you and shave your head. Unless that was the requirement, then keep your hair the way it is. But unfortunately, that was the requirement in this era. When the Manchus conquered the Ming Dynasty and established their own Qing Dynasty, the new emperors forced the Chinese to wear their hair in a style called queue. The queue was basically a shaved forehead and a long braid down the back, and the men would be forced to wear their hair in. Cutting it could result a one-way trip to the gallows, as it was illegal to remove the key or for men to wear their hair in a different hairstyle. Chopping off the key was a sign of rebellion against the government, and the reason why the death toll in the Taiping Rebellion was so high was because Qing forces could easily spot the rebels, as they were the only ones not wearing a queue. Number 3, you're in for a treat. Of course, like all civilizations in the past, they need to utilize all of their resources as much as possible, especially the ones from our bodies. Previously, as I mentioned, how in Rome they would use urine as an honorary mouthwash to keep them teeth pearly whites, but in ancient China they would use urine as medicine. They invented basically endocrinology in the early 200 BC, which is, for those who are too lazy to Google, the study of hormones and endocrine glands and organs. Hormones secreting glands and certain organs in your body make up your endocrine system. When they were picking human secretions, the ancient Chinese chose pee. They would gather up to 150 gallons of male urine in a large pan and boil it until it evaporated. A crystallized hormone that they would then call an autumn mineral would be left behind, and it was just crystallized urine. They couldn't exactly inject hormones back in the day, so they would take the crystallized urine by eating it. They ate a lot of it. And for each dose, one medical paper instructed, take 5 to 7 pills with warm wine or soup before breakfast. And to be honest, it actually worked. Using it as a hormone was able to put a more in-depth understanding of medicine as a whole, and China would then develop a whole field of medicine 2,000 years before the rest of the world. Still no idea who thought of taking pee, boiling it, and placing whatever was left back into one's mouth. But we gotta start somewhere, I guess. Number 2, twinkle toes. I want to make a joke about that Nickelodeon guy, that one producer guy who had a specific taste for this topic, but that would have been a step out of place. Anyways, of the status of the women in ancient China, all of them would be encouraged to bind their feet as tightly as possible. The goal was to have your feet less than 4 inches long. This was called the lotus foot. Although the practice was originally started by the upper class court dancers in the 10th or 11th century, the practice eventually spread to the lowest of the classes until it was finally banned in 1911 after Western missionaries campaigned against it. And at its peak, almost every upper woman class and 50% of the lower class women bounded their feet to look this way. Nonetheless, in some rural villages across China, the last remaining women who have had their feet bound as women are still living, and some of them are still binding their feet, despite the ban. The strange thing was definitely a hot and spicy thing to look at for the men of ancient China, and it was definitely on the requirements if they wanted to wife you up. They even had a specific love manual on how to have fun with their wife's deformed foot. I mean, every part was attractive, but the feet? You could say it was a toe curling experience for both of them. Sorry. Horrible. Number 1, a eunuch's life for thee. Aside number 2, women weren't the only ones physically deforming themselves to survive the day-to-day life in ancient China. As I mentioned the previous top 10 disturbing ancient China facts that will leave you speechless, eunuchs were typically found in the Forbidden City, or, as we know now, the Forbidden Palace. And there were roughly 70,000 of them by the time the palace was finally completed. We learned in that video that eunuchs were a volunteer position, and it was a way to work for the emperor as a servant. For a poor person, it was the best shot at a better life for yourself, at the expense of getting fixed, if you catch my drift. In fact, it was so common for one around the rich cities of the palace for a male to be eunuch, that poor families would even have their children castrated at birth, so essentially you'd be set for life to end up working for the emperor before you even thought of it, which to be honest, would suck if your parents did that, because what if you wanted to open your own business and sell shoes instead? I don't know. It's your problem now. Oh well, either way, being a eunuch was a decent and fairly popular career for a man to just chop it off. Self-castration peaked during the Ming Dynasty, and as one point it grew to an inevitable 100,000 eunuchs working across the country. So many people were committing to the cause that the government had to chase neutered jobless men away from the palace. Eventually they set up an application process where 200 copper coins could get you on a waiting list for eunuch career applications. 250 could work for the emperor, but that was out of 1,000 applicants, so many would end up jobless and wonder why they snipped their doodle in the first place as they begged on the streets. So what was your favorite on the list? Did you learn anything interesting today? Let me know. Oh yeah, your next riddle. Are you ready? What kind of tree can you carry in your hand? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below and I'll reveal the answer in the next video. Top 10 evil women from ancient Egypt nobody told you in textbook.
At number 10, veil. Through this video, you will come to find out that a lot of the wedding traditions that we practice these days have some pretty messed up origins. We'll get through a lot of them throughout this list, but let's start off by talking about the bride's veil. These days, a lot of brides choose to wear a veil on their wedding day. With so many different styles to choose from, this accessory is known to add that extra little pizzazz, little spice to the look. But throughout history, veils were used for different things, some of them being a tad bit messed up. Just a smidge. The rather obvious reason for brides to wear a veil back in the day had to do with religion and staying modest. But this hasn't been the only reason for veils. In ancient Rome, brides wore veils because it was believed to be effective at warding off evil spirits. The most messed up reason for the veil though, at least in my opinion anyway, has to do with the wedding transaction, so to speak. Since back in the olden days, marrying your daughter off was seen as more of a transaction, brides would wear veils to cover their faces and they wouldn't be lifted until after they were proclaimed husband and wife, so that the groom wouldn't be able to back out if he didn't like how his bride looked. Seems pretty messed up to me, but what are your thoughts on it? Tell us down in the comments.
Number 9. When doves cry. I've been to one wedding where they released doves, like actual real life doves, and I was like, do they actually do this? I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't know it was a real thing. Why do we do this? Well, because doves mate for life, and they build a nest, and then they Netflix and chill until the end of their dove days. Sounds like perfect symbolism if I've ever heard it. Back in ancient Roman and Greek times, doves were often used as gifts from the bride to the groom. Pretty shitty gift if you ask me. Here's a bird that we now have to both take care of. The snow white ring-necked dove is used by magicians. They can't fly too well, they don't have a homing instinct, whereas rock doves, the ones commonly used in weddings that we see fly away over Nana's head, they have a homing instinct for hundreds of miles, so they're perfect for the gig. But they couldn't be released during foul weather and they needed 2 hours before the sun sets in order for them to fly home. The wedding band has less rules than the doves. That's amazing. Their rider is much smaller. If you were to catch one of these doves at a wedding, you were also allowed to keep it back in the day. Also, great hands. I don't know who's catching birds or why they want to keep it and put it in their pocket, but you do you.
At number 8, best man. These days, the role of the best man normally goes to the guy who's closest to the groom, whether that's a brother or a best friend. But back during the time where women were married off like property, the role of the best man was very different and was all about protecting one's assets. Back then, bride napping was actually very common, so if there was someone else who wanted to marry someone who was already promised to another person, they might try and steal her away for themselves. Yeah, why? I don't know. This is where the best man came in. The best man's job was to protect the bride, and if she was stolen, the best man would be the one to enter whatever battle or duel was necessary to get the bride back. The best man was literally there to be the best fighter. The best man was also there to watch over the bride to make sure that she didn't try and make a run for it herself. They really said, try to derail this wedding and see what happens.
Number 7. A June wedding. As we're counting down this list slowly but surely, you've probably begun fantasizing maybe about your own wedding one day. Maybe it's a beach wedding, maybe it's themed like a winter wonderland. Doesn't that sound cozy? It's your big day, get creative. They say the best month to get married is June, and from a Canadian point of view, I can absolutely agree with that. In ancient Roman times, however, getting married in June was a must, not just a thing you wanted to do. See, June was the month of the god Juno. They protect women in life when it comes to marriage and childbirth, so if it's between that and like, I don't know, Halloween, obviously we're gonna go with June. Better omens for sure. Another myth is that bathing was rarely done back then, so when majority of the population did finally, wash up at the end of May or beginning of June, that's often when it would happen, everybody smelled nice, they felt good, and they wanted to celebrate. So it was perfect timing. Better get me while my pits smell good, you know? That's a myth, but I can also see it checking out. A June wedding in ancient Roman days was also done so that after a spring birth, the mother can quickly hop back into action and help with that summer's harvest. Maternity leave who? Never heard of her.
At number 6, hashtag twinning. You know how at weddings the bridesmaids are usually wearing matching outfits? Well, this tradition dates back centuries, though it has changed slightly over the years. Remember how I mentioned that people would sometimes try to kidnap the bride on her wedding day? Well, Well, other than the best man and the groomsmen trying to play their part in protecting the bride from being taken, the bridesmaids also played a part in that too. The bridesmaids used to dress identically to the bride so that it would make it harder to spot her and therefore prevent anyone from kidnapping her. This practice dates all the way back to ancient Rome and feudal China and didn't really start to fade out of tradition until around the 1880s. These days you get a couple of gifts from the bride for being in her posse, but back then you didn't get anything and you had to risk your safety for your girl Becky, who doesn't even want to marry Jeff down the block. I don't know.